Valerie Thompson stood at the threshold of the bedroom, watching as her husband methodically packed his shirts into a suitcase, one after another, neatly folded as if he were preparing for a business trip and not demolishing 12 years of marriage. It was early May, a warm Friday evening when most families were planning their weekend together, but not them. "Andrew," she called out softly, but her voice held a strange firmness. "Are you really leaving?" He didn't even turn around, continuing to pack. Every movement was steeped in an indifference more painful than any words. "Valerie, we've already discussed everything," he tossed over his shoulder. "No scenes. I've made my decision." "Disgust." She entered the room, leaning against the doorframe. "You announced yesterday that you have another woman. That's not a discussion, Andrew." He finally turned. Andrew Miller, 36, owner of a small construction firm, a handsome man with regular features and a cold gaze. Right now, that gaze was particularly icy. "Fine, then let's discuss it honestly." He snapped the suitcase shut and sat on the edge of the bed. "Mariana Sinclair is a serious woman. She has capital, connections, opportunities. She'll help me reach a new level, expand the business, get major contracts. Her clients are the most high-profile people in the city. She moves in circles you can't even imagine. You understand? This is my chance." Valerie felt a familiar knot of pain tighten in her stomach. Mariana Sinclair. She had known that name for the last 3 months. The owner of a chain of high-end spas, a 40-year-old divorcee with a formidable fortune and a reputation for getting whatever she wanted. "And what about me?" Valerie asked quietly. "What about Nikki? Your son is 10 years old." "Nikki will stay with you." Andrew shrugged, as if they were dividing furniture. "I'll pay child support, everything by the book." "By what book?" She took a step closer. "The apartment is in your name, the business too. I don't even have my own bank account. You've controlled everything all these years." Andrew smirked, a look of such smugness that Valerie barely restrained herself from slapping him. "Exactly, Valerie. I've thought of everything. The apartment was mine before we got married. Remember the business? I built it myself. You had no part in it. You were a housewife who stayed home with the kid. You'll get your child support, rent a 1-bedroom somewhere cheap. You'll manage." She looked at him and didn't recognize the man who, 12 years ago, had sworn his love for her, who had said they would be together forever, who had cried with joy when Nikki was born. "So, you're just leaving now," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes," he nodded, standing up. "Mariana's waiting for me. She has a country house in an exclusive gated community. In a month, we're going to the Bahamas. She's looking at a villa there." "Valerie, try to understand. It's not personal. It's just, I have a right to a better life." Valerie closed her eyes for a moment. A storm was brewing inside her, anger, hurt, fear for the future. But something else, something cold and calculating, began to awaken in the depths of her mind. Something that had been growing for the past few months as she'd gathered information piece by piece, consulted with a lawyer, Laura Davis, and secretly studied her husband's papers. "Andrew," she said, her voice suddenly calm, "stay. At least for one night." He had already picked up the suitcase, heading for the door, but he stopped. "What?" "Stay for one last night," Valerie repeated. "Leave forever tomorrow if you want. But tonight, let's have a proper farewell dinner. We lived together for 12 years, Andrew. That has to mean something." He looked at her with suspicion, but then his expression softened. She saw a flicker of self-satisfaction in his eyes. He thought she was broken, begging for pity, wanting a beautiful goodbye, perhaps even hoping to change his mind over dinner. "Fine," Andrew agreed, setting the suitcase by the wall. "One night, but tomorrow morning, I'm gone. And no tears, got it? Deal." Valerie nodded and smiled. It was a strange smile. Had Andrew been more observant, he would have noticed something unsettling in it. But he didn't. He saw only a submissive wife who had accepted her fate. "I'll make your favorite," she said, turning toward the door. "Pot roast with vegetables. I'll open that bottle of wine we were saving for a special occasion." "I guess this is a special occasion, isn't it, Valerie?" he grumbled, though it was clear her compliance pleased him. "Fine. I'll take a shower. I'll call Mariana and tell her I'll be there tomorrow morning." Valerie walked out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. Her thoughts were crystal clear. She opened the refrigerator, took out the meat, vegetables, and herbs, and preheated the oven. Her movements were automatic. She had made this dish hundreds of times, but tonight she wasn't just cooking dinner, she was setting a trap. While Andrew was in the shower, Valerie quickly went into his home office and opened the safe. She had figured out the combination long ago, watching him punch in the numbers. She had already made copies of the documents inside a week ago and given them to Laura. Now, it was time for the final part of the plan. She returned to the kitchen just as Andrew emerged from the bathroom in sweatpants and a t-shirt. He looked relaxed, even pleased. He sat on the balcony with a cigarette, a habit he'd tried to quit 3 times but always returned to. "Dinner will be ready in half an hour," Valerie announced, stirring the gravy. "Let's eat here in the kitchen," he called back. "Keep it casual." Valerie smirked to herself. Perfect. She had been counting on the kitchen. There, at the table, it would be easier to execute her plan. Nicky was at her mother's. She had taken him there last night, telling him it was better he didn't see what was about to happen. The boy knew nothing of the impending divorce. He would find out later, when it was all over. Andrew came back from the balcony and sat at the table. Valerie placed a plate of the steaming pot roast in front of him and retrieved a bottle of expensive red wine from the cabinet, a gift from his business partners 2 years ago. "What are we drinking to?" he asked, as she filled their glasses. "To new beginnings," Valerie replied calmly. "To your new life. To you getting everything you deserve." He missed the double meaning, clinked his glass against hers, and took a deep swallow. The wine was robust and complex. He nodded in approval. "Excellent wine. A shame we didn't open it sooner." "Yes, a shame," she agreed, taking a small sip. Her glass remained nearly full, but Andrew drank with gusto. They ate, and Valerie steered the conversation, making him relax even more. She asked about his plans, about the business, about Mariana. Flattered by the attention, he blossomed like a flower. He boasted about how he had legally zeroed her out, how he had moved company assets through shell corporations, how he had made sure the apartment was in his name alone, even though her mother had provided the down payment. "You see, Valerie, in business, you have to think one step ahead," he said, pouring himself a third glass. His cheeks were flushed. "I always calculated the possibilities. Even when we got married, I knew something might go wrong. I needed protection." "Protection from me?" she asked softly. "Well, not from you specifically. From circumstances?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Look at all the divorces around, and the courts are always on the woman's side. Guys lose everything. I just insured myself." Valerie nodded, committing every word to memory. Her phone was in her apron pocket, the voice recorder app running. She had started it before they even sat down. "And the money?" she asked carefully. "You said the company was having difficulties, that profits were down." He chuckled, a sound filled with cynicism. "That's what I told you, so you wouldn't ask for extra. In reality, the company's doing great, really great. I have 3 accounts, 2 official and 1 in the Cayman Islands. That's where I'm moving the real money. Mariana taught me. Half of her business is in offshore accounts too." "Smart," Valerie remarked, topping off his glass. "You were always smarter than me in these things." "Well, yeah." He was getting sloppy drunk. "You're a good mother, Valerie. I'm not denying that. But in business, you're a zero. That's why you'll get the bare minimum. Child support. What the law requires. That's it." She listened and smiled, while inside, the coldness hardened into ice. When dinner was over, Valerie pulled a folder from a drawer. "Andrew, let's handle the divorce like civilized people," she suggested. "I've known about your affair for a while. I realized a divorce was inevitable, so I prepared for it. Here are the papers." My lawyer drew them up. We sign them, and tomorrow you can leave without any extra drama." He was surprised by her foresight but took the documents, his eyes scanning them. The text was dense with legal jargon, printed in a small font. Andrew was drunk, smug, and inattentive. He saw standard phrases about the division of property and child support. He didn't notice the subtleties that he was signing an agreement to divide all assets equally, that he was acknowledging Valerie's substantial contribution to the family's well-being, that he was agreeing the apartment was purchased with joint funds, including money from her mother. It was, effectively, a postnuptial agreement that undid all his careful planning. "Hand me a pen," he grunted. Valerie did. He signed his name with a flourish across 3 pages. She took the documents, folded them neatly back into the folder. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it." He stood up, swaying slightly. "I'm going to lie down. My head's spinning. That wine is strong." "Lie down on the couch in the living room," Valerie offered. "I'll get you a pillow and a blanket." She brought them out. Andrew stretched out on the sofa and closed his eyes. A minute later, his breathing was even as he sank into a drunken sleep. Valerie stood over him, looking at the man who had been her husband, the father of her child, who was about to cast them out of his life like unwanted objects. "Sleep, Andrew," she whispered. "Tomorrow you'll get everything you deserve." She covered him with the blanket, turned off the light in the living room, and went back to the kitchen. She took out his personal laptop, the password to which she had also known for a long time. She opened his email, found the contacts for his business partners, his bank, and the local IRS office, and began to write. She attached the documents she had been copying for months, the audio recording of tonight's dinner, screenshots of Andrew's texts with Mariana where they discussed how to force Valerie out of the apartment. Send, send, send. The clock showed 3 a.m. when she finished. Valerie closed the laptop, put it back in its place, then went to the bathroom, washed her face, and looked at her reflection. She was 33 years old. 12 of those years she had given to her family, her husband, her son, and what had she received in return? Betrayal and cold calculation. But now she was hitting back. And her strike would be precise. Valerie went to bed in her own bed. For the first time in months, she fell asleep peacefully. The morning was going to be interesting. Valerie woke early, just as dawn was breaking. It was 6 a.m. on a Saturday. Andrew was still asleep in the living room. She could hear him snoring. The alcohol and exhaustion had done their job. She got up, showered, and dressed in simple jeans and a light blouse. No makeup, no jewelry. Today, she needed to look serious and composed. In the kitchen, Valerie brewed strong coffee, sat at the table with her phone, and began checking for replies to her late-night emails. The first message was from Laura Davis, her lawyer. "Val. Got all the documents. The audio recording is a bombshell. The signed agreement is great too. Meeting at the notary's office at 10 a.m., as planned. Stay strong." Valerie exhaled. The first stage was a success. She opened the next email, from Michael Porter, Andrew's former business partner, the one Andrew had double-crossed 3 years ago, stealing a major contract and leaving Porter with nothing. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for the information. Very interesting documents regarding your husband's financial schemes. I will forward them to my contacts at the IRS. Andrew and I have an old score to settle. Now it's his turn to pay." She smiled. Porter had been waiting for this moment for years. Now he had the ammunition. The third email was from a representative of Capital Trust Bank, where Andrew's company had its main account. It was a formal notification that the bank was initiating an internal audit of Miller Construction LLC's transactions in light of information received about possible irregularities. Valerie sipped her coffee. Everything was going according to plan, but the main event was yet to come. At 7:30, she heard the couch creak in the living room. Andrew was waking up. Valerie stood, poured another cup of coffee, and brought it to him. He was sitting on the couch, holding his head. His face was puffy, his eyes red. "God," My head is splitting, he groaned. What kind of wine was that last night? A good wine, Valerie answered calmly, handing him the coffee. You just had too much of it. He took the cup, took a few sips, and looked at his watch. 8 a.m. I need to get going. Mariana is expecting me for lunch. Wait, Valerie said. Let's have breakfast. I made an omelet with cheese, just how you like it. Andrew looked at her, surprised. Valerie, you're being strange today. Too calm. How should I be? She shrugged. You're leaving. I've accepted it. Let's have one last morning without a fight. He nodded, still wary, but his hangover was getting the better of him. His head throbbed, and he was hungry. He went to the bathroom to wash up. When he returned, breakfast was on the kitchen table. They ate in silence. Valerie watched him out of the corner of her eye. Andrew was focused on his food, not noticing her periodic glances at the clock. 8:45 a.m. Listen, Andrew, she began, after he had finished. My lawyer called yesterday. She said we need to clarify something in the documents. Maybe you should look again at what you signed? He grimaced. Valerie, I read it yesterday. It's a standard divorce settlement. I don't want to get into it again. Just take a look, she insisted, taking the folder and placing it in front of him. You're the one with the legal mind. Reluctantly, Andrew opened the folder and began to read. This time more slowly. Suddenly, his face changed, his eyebrows shot up, his eyes widened. What the? He scanned the text again. Valerie, this isn't a divorce settlement. This is an agreement to divide all assets 50/50. It says here that I acknowledge your contribution to the marriage, that the apartment was bought with joint funds. You signed it yesterday. Valerie reminded him calmly. Of your own free will. Free will? He roared, jumping up. I was drunk. You got me drunk. No one forced you to drink, she retorted. You finished almost the entire bottle yourself, and you signed the documents voluntarily. Andrew grabbed the papers and began to tear them to shreds. Valerie watched him, unfazed. You can tear those up, she said. They're copies. The originals were picked up by a courier this morning. They're already in a safe place. You can even demand a handwriting analysis. You. He choked on his rage. You set this all up. I protected myself and my son, Valerie replied firmly. You were going to leave us with nothing. You thought I was a dumb housewife who didn't understand anything. You were wrong. He paced the kitchen like a caged animal. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyer. We'll contest this agreement. You won't get a dime. Go ahead, she nodded. But first, listen to something. Valerie took out her phone, opened an audio file, and pressed play. Yesterday's conversation filled the room. Andrew's voice, slightly slurred but clear. I have 3 accounts, 2 official, and 1 in the Cayman Islands. That's where I'm moving the real money. Mariana taught me. I always calculated the possibilities. Even when we got married, I knew something might go wrong. I needed protection. In reality, the company's doing great. Really great. Andrew turned pale. Valerie stopped the recording. That's the recording from last night's dinner, she explained. An hour and a half of your confessions. About the hidden accounts, how you funneled money out of the company, how you cheated on your taxes. It's all documented. You had no right to record me, he hissed. I did. This is my apartment too, by the way, and I have the right to protect my interests. She stood up and moved closer. Do you know what I did last night while you were asleep? I sent copies of that recording and the documents from your safe to a few interested parties. What parties? His face had turned gray. To Michael Porter, for example, your old partner. Remember him? The one you screwed over 3 years ago. He was very happy to learn the details of your financial schemes. Porter. Andrew grabbed the table for support. Valerie, you don't know what you've done. I also sent copies to Capital Trust Bank, she continued, unperturbed, to their financial monitoring department. They were very interested in your company's transactions. I believe they're starting an audit. Andrew sank onto a chair. His hands were shaking. "You've destroyed me," he whispered. "How could you?" "How could I?" Valerie leaned toward him, her voice as cold as ice. "How could you abandon your wife and child for a rich mistress? How could you transfer all the assets to your name and plan to leave us destitute? I was faithful to you for 12 years, Andrew. I gave you a son, managed your home, supported you in everything. And you? You were counting the days until you could throw me out." He remained silent, staring at the floor. "Last night, you said you had a right to a better life," Valerie continued. "Well, you know what? I also have a right to justice, to protection, to ensure my son doesn't end up on the street because of his father's selfishness." The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Valerie glanced at the clock. 9 a.m. on the dot. "That's for you," she said. "Should I get it?" Andrew didn't answer. She walked to the hallway and opened the door. 3 people stood on the threshold. A middle-aged woman in a sharp business suit holding a briefcase, a man in a sheriff's deputy uniform, and another man holding a bank ID. "Valerie Miller?" the woman asked. "Yes, that's me. Laura Davis, your attorney. And these are representatives from the bank and the court. We had a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Please, come in," Valerie said, opening the door wider. They entered. Andrew was still sitting in the kitchen, pale, his gaze vacant. "Andrew Miller?" The bank representative, a young man in glasses, addressed him. "My name is Kyle Fisher. I'm from the Security Department of Capital Trust Bank. We need to ask you a few questions regarding your company's operations." "What questions?" Andrew asked numbly. "We've been made aware of possible irregularities in the financial operations of Miller Construction LLC," Fisher said, opening a tablet. He began to read. "Undeclared accounts, transfer of funds through shell companies, concealment of income from the IRS. We have grounds to initiate a full investigation." "It's all lies," Andrew tried to object, but his voice was weak. "We have an audio recording where you admit to these violations yourself," Fisher noted calmly, "plus documentary evidence. Do you understand the seriousness of this situation?" Meanwhile, Laura Davis laid out documents on the table. "Mrs. Miller, here is the property settlement agreement, signed by your husband last night," she said, pointing to the papers. "According to this agreement, Andrew Miller acknowledges that the apartment you reside in is marital property. He acknowledges the initial down payment was provided by your mother. You also have the right to seek compensation through the court for your contributions to the marriage over 12 years. "I was drunk when I signed it," Andrew yelled. "It's not valid. A state of intoxication is not grounds for invalidating a contract if the signature was given voluntarily," Laura countered. "No one forced you to drink, Mr. Miller, and no one held your hand when you signed." The sheriff's deputy, a quiet older man with a mustache, took out his own tablet. "Furthermore," he added, based on the filed petition for division of assets, "I must inform you that a lien has been placed on your share of the apartment and the business pending the conclusion of all proceedings." "A lien?" Andrew jumped up. "You can't do that." "We can," the deputy replied coolly. "Standard procedure in asset division cases involving contested marital property." Andrew lunged for the door, but Valerie blocked his path. "Where are you going?" she asked quietly. "To Mariana? Do you think she'll take you in now?" "Get out of my way," he snarled. "Call her." Valerie took his phone from his pocket and held it out. "Go on, call her. Tell her you're in trouble with the law, that your accounts might be frozen, that your reputation is shot. Let's see how fast she drops you." Andrew grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed Mariana's number. She answered on the second ring. "Andrew, where are you? I've been waiting for an hour." Her voice was irritated. "Mariana, I'm in trouble," he began. "Serious trouble." "Valerie, wait, what kind of trouble?" Her voice turned cautious. "She set me up. She recorded our conversation, sent documents to the bank, to the IRS. There's a sheriff's deputy here, a guy from the bank. They're talking about an investigation, about fraud." A pause. A long, heavy pause. "Andrew," Mariana finally said, her voice turning to ice, I cannot be associated with a person who has problems with the law. I have a reputation, a business. This is not good for me. Mariana, wait, he pleaded. You promised. We had plans. We planned nothing, she cut him off. You had plans. Andrew, I'm sorry, but I have to think of myself. Don't call me again. Click, she hung up. Andrew stood with the phone in his hand, and Valerie watched as his world crumbled. The confidence with which he had packed his suitcase yesterday turned to ash. She dumped you, Valerie stated. At the first sign of trouble. So much for true love. He slumped back into the chair, dropping the phone on the table. What do you want? He asked quietly. What are you trying to achieve? Justice, Valerie answered. I want my son to grow up in a normal environment, to have a roof over his head. I want you to be responsible for your actions. Laura Davis sat down at the table. Mr. Miller, let's talk constructively, she proposed. You have two options. First, we go to court. Everything will come out, the hidden accounts, the tax schemes, all of it. You'll face serious problems, up to and including criminal charges. The second option, you honor the settlement agreement, pay Mrs. Miller the agreed-upon compensation, and commit to paying a fair amount of child support. In return, we will try to resolve the situation with the bank and the IRS without excessive publicity. So you're blackmailing me, Andrew said hollowly. We're offering a reasonable compromise, Laura corrected him. The choice is yours. He sat with his head in his hands. Valerie looked at him and felt no pity, no gloating, only a cold satisfaction that her plan had worked. Finally, Andrew raised his head. Fine, he exhaled. I agree to the settlement. Just make sure this doesn't lead to criminal charges. We will do our best, Laura nodded. But for that, you will have to cooperate fully. Provide all data on your accounts and schemes, pay your back taxes, and, of course, fulfill all the conditions of the agreement with Mrs. Miller. He nodded, defeated. Valerie stood up. I'll go pack your things, she said. You didn't get to finish yesterday. She left the kitchen and went to the bedroom. She pulled his suitcase from under the bed and began packing his shirts, pants, and shoes, neatly, without rushing. When she returned to the kitchen, Andrew was already signing new documents under the watchful eyes of Laura and the deputy. The bank representative was making notes on his tablet. Here are your things. Valerie placed the suitcase by the door. You can go now. Andrew got up and looked at her with an assessing gaze. You've changed, Valerie, he said. You've become hard. No, she countered. I just stopped being convenient. For you, that's the same thing. He picked up the suitcase and walked to the exit. At the door, he turned back. Where am I supposed to live? I don't know, Valerie shrugged. But that's no longer my problem. The door closed behind him. And for the first time, in a very long time, Valerie felt a great weight lift from her shoulders. Laura came over and put a hand on her arm. You were amazing, she said softly. You handled that with dignity. Thank you, Valerie breathed. For everything. When everyone had left, she was alone in the apartment. She sat down on the couch where Andrew had slept last night, and only then did she allow herself to relax. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over yet. 2 weeks had passed since that momentous morning, 2 weeks during which Andrew Miller's life had fallen apart like a house of cards in the wind. He was renting a room from an old acquaintance, Gary Collins, another divorced sad sack who lived in a rundown 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The room was tiny, a single bed, an old wardrobe, a chair, and a small table by the window. The view from the window was of an industrial park and gray high-rises. Andrew sat on that bed on a Saturday evening, replaying the events of the last few days in his head. After that morning at the apartment, everything had snowballed. On Monday, Greg Sanders, one of his business partners, had called him. His voice was cold and official. Andrew, we need to meet. Urgently. They met at the company office. Besides Greg, Victor Hayes, the other co-owner, was there, along with their bookkeeper, Nina Peterson, a woman of pre-retirement age with an iron will. "Sit," Greg said, motioning to a chair opposite the desk. Andrew sat, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "We've become aware of certain facts regarding your financial activities," Victor began, opening a folder of documents, "about how you've been funneling company money through shell corporations, about hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands, about how you've been understating profits to avoid sharing with your partners." "That's slander," Andrew tried to object, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have a recording of your confession." Greg pressed play on an audio player. Andrew's voice from that fateful dinner filled the room. "Your ex-wife was kind enough to share this material with us." Andrew went pale. Valerie hadn't just sent the recording to the bank and Porter, she had sent it everywhere she could. "We are calling an emergency meeting of the board," Victor continued. "We will be voting to remove you from the company, to buy out your shares, and to seek restitution for the stolen funds." "You can't just kick me out." Andrew jumped up. "I own 40%. "We can," Nina Peterson said calmly. "Breach of fiduciary duty. Embezzling company assets is more than just a breach, Mr. Miller. We'll give you 1 week to voluntarily resign from the board," Greg added. "Otherwise, we go to court, and then everything becomes public." "I don't think you need that right now, considering the bank's investigation." Andrew left the office feeling the ground give way beneath his feet. The company he had built for 8 years was slipping through his fingers. On Tuesday, an official notice came from the bank. Capital Trust had frozen all of Miller Construction's accounts pending the outcome of the investigation. This meant the company couldn't meet its current obligations to contractors and clients, which in turn threatened fines and contract terminations. On Wednesday, Michael Porter called. The call was brief. "Hello, Andrew. Remember me? You left me without a penny 3 years ago. Now it's my turn. I've passed the materials about your schemes to the IRS. Expect an audit. And yes, I've filed a lawsuit against you. I'm seeking damages for that contract you stole. With 3 years of interest. The total is quite substantial. Good luck." Click. Andrew sat in his rented room and realized he was trapped in a perfectly constructed snare. Valerie had thought of every detail. She was attacking on all fronts simultaneously: personal, financial, and legal. He had no time to defend himself, no resources. On Thursday, the IRS arrived, demanding documents, statements, and explanations. Andrew tried to say something, to justify himself, but the agents looked at him with cold contempt. They had the audio recording of his confessions. They had the documents Valerie had copied from his safe. They knew everything. "We are initiating a field audit," the senior agent, a stern woman in her 50s, announced. "It will last 2 months. We will be examining all transactions for the past 3 years. Prepare your documents. And yes, you'd better hire a good tax attorney. The preliminary amount of your unpaid taxes could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hundreds of thousands." Andrew didn't know where he would get that kind of money. His personal savings were dwindling rapidly. Rent, lawyers, attempts to resolve the conflict with his partners. The account in the Caymans was frozen. The bank had requested an explanation for the source of the funds, and Andrew couldn't provide one without admitting to his crimes. On Friday morning, Laura Davis, Valerie's lawyer, called him. "Mr. Miller, you need to come to the notary's office to sign the final documents for the property division. Today at 2 p.m. Don't be late." "I'm not coming," he snapped. "I don't have the money to pay Valerie." "Then we will go to court," Laura replied calmly. "And everything will be decided there by force. Plus legal fees, plus publicity. It's your choice." He went. He sat in the notary's office, signing papers that relinquished half of the apartment to Valerie, that obligated him to pay her a compensation of $200,000 for her 12 years of contribution to the marriage, that required him to pay monthly child support for Nikki. Valerie sat across from him. She was dressed formally, a black suit, a white blouse, her hair pulled back. Her makeup was understated. She looked like a businesswoman, not the housewife he was used to seeing. They didn't speak, only signed the documents under the watch of the notary, a stern woman in glasses who monotonously read out the clauses of the agreement. When it was all done, Valerie stood up, took her copy of the documents, and headed for the exit. At the door, she stopped and turned around. "Andrew," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, only weariness. "I didn't want it to come to this, but you forced me to defend myself. If you had acted honorably, we could have parted ways amicably. But you chose war, and you got it." She left, leaving him alone in the hallway of the notary's office. Now, 2 weeks after that fateful night, Andrew lay on a stranger's bed in a stranger's room and tried to understand where exactly he had gone wrong. When had this downfall begun? Maybe when he decided that Mariana Sinclair was his ticket to a better life? Maybe when he started hiding money from his wife and partners? Or even earlier, when he stopped valuing what he had? His phone rang. Andrew glanced at the screen, an unknown number. He didn't want to answer, but he pressed the green button anyway. "Hello, Andrew Miller?" an unfamiliar male voice asked. "Yes, this is he. My name is Stanley Burton. I represent the Financial Assurance Collection Agency. We've been informed that you have an outstanding debt to Capital Trust Bank for a business development loan. The amount due is $320,000. When do you plan to repay it?" Andrew froze. The loan. He had taken it out a year ago to expand the company and then diverted some of the funds for personal use. The payments had stopped after the accounts were frozen. I can't pay right now," he stammered. "I'm having problems." "Your problems don't interest us," Burton cut him off. "We're interested in debt recovery. We're giving you 10 days to resolve the situation, otherwise we will begin legal proceedings and asset seizure." "What assets?" Andrew laughed bitterly. "I have nothing left." "We'll see about that," Burton promised and hung up. Andrew threw the phone onto the bed. Everything was collapsing, everything was falling into an abyss, and the scariest part was, he saw no way out. There was a knock on the door. Gary came in, a short man with thinning hair and a perpetually tired face. "Andy, listen. I hate to ask, but..." He hesitated. "You need to pay the rent for this month. $1,500. I'm tight on cash myself. Got my own loans. You know?" "Yeah, I know." Andrew nodded. "I'll transfer it tomorrow." "Okay." Gary started to leave but paused. "Why so gloomy?" "Something happened." "Everything happened, Gary," Andrew replied wearily. "All of it, because of the divorce, because of my own stupidity. I thought I had it all figured out, that Valerie wouldn't do anything because she was weak, dependent on me. Turns out I was wrong. She was stronger." "Women are always stronger and smarter than they seem," Gary remarked philosophically. "My ex-wife was a quiet one too, but when we divorced, she turned into a tank. Took the house, the car, half my salary. Now here I am, in this dump." "Aren't you angry with her?" Gary shrugged. "I was for the first year. Then I realized she was right. I was drinking, messing around, not bringing money home. She was holding the family together on her own. Why should she end up with nothing when I bailed? It was my own fault." He left, closing the door behind him. Andrew was left alone. My own fault. The words spun in his head. He remembered Valerie, what she was like when they first got married. Cheerful, loving, ready to do anything for her family. How she had supported him when the business was just starting. How she had lost sleep when Nikki was born but never complained. How she had run the household, cooked, created a comfortable home. And him? He had taken it all for granted. He thought his contribution was the money he earned, and hers was insignificant because she just stayed home. Now he understood how blind he had been. On Sunday morning, Andrew took a desperate step. He dialed Mariana Sinclair's number. She hadn't answered for 2 weeks, but now, to his surprise, she picked up. "Andrew." Her voice was cold. "Why are you calling?" "Mariana, I need your help," he began. "I'm in very serious trouble. Audits, debts. My partners are forcing me out of the business. I thought maybe you..." "Andrew, stop." she interrupted. "There's nothing between us anymore. I'm not getting involved in your problems. But you said you loved me, that we would be together." She laughed. It was a short, contemptuous laugh. "Love? Andrew? Are you really that naive? You were interesting to me while you were successful. A promising businessman, a potential partner. But now you're a nobody. You have legal troubles, debts, a ruined reputation. I don't need that kind of baggage." "So you just used me," Andrew whispered. "We used each other," Mariana corrected him. "Don't play the victim. You left your wife and child for a chance to move up. I offered you that chance. You took it. You just didn't calculate that your wife would be smarter than you." "Mariana, don't call me again," she said sharply. "I have a new project, new partners. You're in the past. Goodbye." Click. Andrew sat with the phone in his hand, feeling a void grow inside him. He was alone, without a business, without money, without a home, without a mistress, without friends. Even his partners had turned their backs on him. The only thing he had left was his son, Nicky. But after the divorce, Valerie had restricted his contact with the boy, a meeting once a week, on weekends. Nicky looked at his father with confusion and hurt. The boy had found out that his dad had left the family, abandoned them. Last Sunday, they had met in the park. Nicky was silent, withdrawn. Andrew tried to get him to talk, bought him ice cream, but the boy just gave one-word answers and clearly wanted to leave. "Nicky, are you mad at me?" Andrew asked, sitting beside him on a bench. The boy shrugged. "Mom was crying," he said quietly. "At night, she thought I was asleep, but I heard her." "Why did you hurt her, Dad?" It's complicated, Nicky. Grown-up relationships are complicated. Mom says you wanted to leave for another lady. That you didn't need us. No, son, I need you." Andrew tried to hug the boy, but he pulled away. "Then why did you leave?" Tears welled up in Nicky's eyes. "Why didn't you stay with us?" Andrew had no answer. What could he say? That he had chosen money and status over his family? That he thought he was smarter than everyone and turned out to be a fool? Valerie approached them and took her son's hand. "Time's up, Andrew," she said softly. "We have to go." "Val, wait." He stood up. "Can I see Nicky next week? Maybe I can take him to my place for the weekend." "Your place?" She looked at him intently. "You're living in a rented room in someone else's apartment. There isn't even a proper bed for a child." "No, Andrew. Until you have a suitable place to live, Nicky will only see you in my presence." She walked away, leading the boy. Nicky looked back and waved to his father. Andrew waved back, a lump forming in his throat. Now, a week after that meeting, he understood. Valerie was right about everything. He couldn't provide his son with even the most basic comfort. He couldn't be a proper father while his own life was in shambles. Andrew stood up from the bed and walked to the window. A light drizzle was falling outside, even though it was May. The weather was overcast and cold. He looked at the gray buildings, the industrial park in the distance, the few pedestrians under umbrellas. Yesterday, he had started working as a taxi driver, temporarily, until he could solve his financial problems. He leased a car from a taxi service. His own had been repossessed by the court. He began driving passengers. The work was hard, 12 hours a day, from early morning until late at night. The customers were varied, polite and rude, generous and cheap. He drove them around the city, listening to their conversations, their problems, and with each passing day, he understood more acutely. He was to blame for everything that had happened. He had built this trap himself. Valerie had simply used his own weapons against him. The phone rang again. Andrew glanced at the screen. Laura Davis. "Yes?" he answered warily. "Mr. Miller, I have some information for you." The lawyer's voice was businesslike. "The IRS has completed its preliminary audit. The amount of unpaid taxes is $420,000. Plus fines and penalties, another $200,000. That's a total of $620,000. You have 3 months to pay. Otherwise, The case will be handed over to the DA for criminal proceedings. $620,000. He didn't have a tenth of that amount. I can't pay, he said simply. Then you'll have to declare bankruptcy, Laura replied. It's the only way out. I can help with the paperwork. My fee is $20,000. I don't have $20,000. Then contact legal aid, she advised. They can help for free or for a nominal fee. She hung up. Andrew sank back onto the bed. Bankruptcy. A word that meant complete and utter ruin, the end of everything he had built for years. He lay down, closed his eyes, and tried not to think at all. And somewhere downtown, in a spacious apartment overlooking a park, Valerie was tucking Nicky into bed. The boy smiled sleepily, hugging a teddy bear. "Mom, are we always going to live together now?" he asked. "Always, sweetie," Valerie replied, kissing him. "Always." She left the nursery, closed the door, and went into the living room. She sat on the couch and opened her laptop. A spreadsheet with her finances was on the screen. The compensation from Andrew had started to arrive in small installments. Her share of the apartment was officially registered. Child support came regularly. She had won, but the victory brought no joy. Only relief and a strange emptiness. Valerie closed the laptop and sighed. Outside, dusk was falling, the city was lighting up, and somewhere in that city, her ex-husband was starting a new life, the life he deserved. A month had passed since the divorce. June brought warm days and bright sunshine to the city, but for Andrew Miller, these changes in the weather meant nothing. His life remained gray and joyless, despite the summer sky outside his window. He worked as a taxi driver 14 hours a day, trying to earn some money. He left at 6 a.m. and returned to his rented room after midnight. He ate on-the-go hot dogs from street vendors, coffee from machines. He slept for 5 hours and then got back behind the wheel. The car lease consumed half his earnings. The other half went to rent, food, and child support for Nicky. There was almost nothing left for himself. Andrew had lost weight. His face was gaunt. Gray hairs had appeared at his temples. In the mirror, he saw a tired, middle-aged man who looked older than his 36 years. Today was Wednesday, a typical workday. Andrew was driving another client, a young guy in a business suit who was on his phone the entire ride, talking about contracts, multi-million-dollar deals, a trip to Dubai. Andrew listened and felt a bitter sting. Just 2 months ago, he himself had been that successful, confident man, making big plans. "Stop here," the guy said, without looking up from his phone. Andrew pulled over in front of an office building. The client paid with a card, not even glancing at the driver, and hopped out of the car. Andrew watched him go and smirked bitterly. A year ago, he wouldn't have noticed the taxi driver, just as this guy hadn't noticed him now. His phone pinged with a new ride request. The address was in an upscale part of the city, where expensive mansions and townhouses were located. Andrew accepted the ride and started driving. As the car crawled through traffic, he remembered a recent conversation with his former partners. A week ago, Greg Sanders had called and asked to meet. They met in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, neutral territory. Greg looked prosperous, tanned, in an expensive suit, with a new watch on his wrist. "Andrew, we've finalized your exit from the company," he began without preamble. "Your shares have been bought out. The amount was symbolic, $30,000, considering all your violations and the losses you caused us. $30,000 for a business that was worth millions. That's robbery," Andrew rasped. "It's justice," Greg countered. "For 3 years, you stole from the company, funneled money through shell corporations, understated profits. We could have paid you nothing and sued you for embezzlement. Consider yourself lucky." "Lucky." Andrew laughed hysterically. "I'm $1 million in debt. The IRS wants over $600,000. The bank, $300,000. Porter filed a lawsuit for another $200,000. And you're talking about luck? You need to declare bankruptcy," Greg advised, finishing his coffee. "It's the only way out. Otherwise, they'll sue you into oblivion. They might even file criminal charges for tax evasion. Criminal charges. Andrew turned pale. Tax evasion on that scale, up to 5 years in prison. Greg stood up, putting money on the table for the coffee. Think about it, Andrew. Time is running out. He left, leaving his former partner sitting there, stunned. Now, driving through the city, Andrew was still processing that information. Criminal charges, prison. It was beyond his worst nightmares. He arrived at the address, a large mansion behind a high fence, a manicured garden, expensive cars in the driveway. He called the client. A woman in her 40s came out, wearing an elegant summer dress and large sunglasses. Andrew's blood ran cold. Mariana Sinclair. She got into the back seat without looking at the driver. She gave the address of one of her beauty salons downtown. Andrew silently started the car and drove. For the first 5 minutes, she was on the phone, discussing cosmetic supplies, staff schedules, a new advertising campaign. Her voice was businesslike, confident. Then she hung up and suddenly looked closely at the driver in the rearview mirror. "Andrew!" she exclaimed in disbelief. He met her gaze in the mirror. "Yes, Mariana, it's me." She took off her glasses. Her face was a mixture of surprise, disgust, and pity. Andrew couldn't tell which. "You're a taxi driver now?" she asked. "As you can see." An awkward pause followed. Andrew focused on the road, gripping the steering wheel. Mariana was staring at him, and he could feel her gaze on the back of his neck. "How are you?" she finally asked, her voice filled with feigned sympathy. "Fantastic," he replied sharply. "I work 14 hours a day, live in a closet, and owe money to everyone. Just great." "Andrew, no need for sarcasm," she sighed. "I was just asking. And why the sudden interest?" He stopped at a red light and turned around. "2 months ago, you dumped me when you found out about my problems. Said I was baggage, remember?" Mariana looked away. "I was being pragmatic. I didn't want to get involved in trouble. It's business, Andrew. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal," he repeated and laughed. "You destroyed my family. I left my wife and son for you. I lost everything. And for you, it's nothing personal. I didn't force you to get a divorce," Mariana retorted coldly. "You made that decision yourself. You wanted to move up, make more money, get access to my connections. I offered you an opportunity, but you couldn't handle it. Your wife turned out to be smarter." "Yes, she did," Andrew agreed. The light turned green. He drove on. Valerie planned everything down to the last detail. She recorded my confessions, gathered evidence, set a trap, and I fell for it like the world's biggest idiot. "She's a strong woman," Mariana remarked. I looked into her. A housewife for 12 years, raised a child, ran a home, and when she realized you were betraying her, she mobilized, found a lawyer, and developed a plan. Women like that are dangerous. They endure for a long time, but when they decide to act, they strike to kill. Andrew was silent. He remembered Valerie on that last night. Calm, collected, completely in control. She had played him like a cat with a mouse, and he hadn't even noticed. "Are you seeing anyone now?" Mariana asked suddenly. "Anyone?" He smirked. "What kind of personal life, Mariana?" He shook his head. "I work 14 hours a day to pay off my debts. I live in a rented room. My son barely speaks to me because I abandoned him and his mother. I have an IRS audit, the threat of criminal charges. My partners have turned their backs on me. What the hell kind of personal life could I have?" Mariana was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry it turned out this way," she finally said. "No, I'm sorry," Andrew countered. "You don't care. You've already found someone new, haven't you?" "I'm sure of it." She didn't deny it. "Yes, I have. The owner of a chain of fitness clubs. A promising man. We have common interests, plans to grow our businesses." "Congratulations," Andrew said dryly. "I hope this one doesn't turn out to be such a loser." "Andrew, you're not a loser." She leaned forward, placing a hand on the back of his seat. "You just made mistakes, a lot of them. The biggest one was underestimating your wife." Thanks for the sage advice. He turned onto the street where her salon was located. We're here. The car stopped at the entrance. Mariana paid, opened the door, but before getting out, she turned back. Andrew, if you need any help, she began. I don't, he interrupted. I don't need anything from you, Mariana. Go to your new, promising fiancé. Live happily ever after. I'll figure things out myself. She got out and slammed the door. Andrew watched her walk into the salon. A confident stride, a proud posture, an expensive dress. A woman who knew her worth. A woman for whom people were tools to achieve her goals. He turned the car around and drove on. He took new orders, drove passengers, listened to their conversations. At one point, he stopped to eat at a roadside diner, buying a greasy burger and a coffee. He sat at a plastic table, chewing the tasteless food and thinking about how his life had turned upside down. In the evening, an unknown number called. Andrew answered without looking. Andrew Miller? A stern female voice asked. Yes, speaking. This is Inspector Evans from the IRS. You need to report to our office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bring your passport and all documents confirming your income for the past 3 years. I can't tomorrow. I'm working. Andrew tried to argue. This is not a request, it's a summons, Evans said sharply. If you don't appear voluntarily, we will have you subpoenaed, and the consequences will be more severe. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't be late. She hung up. Andrew slammed his fist on the steering wheel. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. meant missing the morning rush, losing money, but he had no choice. He returned to his rented room well after midnight. Gary was sitting in the kitchen, drinking a beer and watching some talk show on TV. Hey Andy, he nodded. How was your day? Same as always, Andrew replied wearily, slumping into a chair. Work, traffic, clients, and tomorrow I have to go to the IRS. The taxman, Gary shook his head sympathetically. That's bad news. My brother fought with them for 2 years, ended up declaring bankruptcy. They wiped his debts, but the stress nearly killed him. They're advising me to file for bankruptcy too, Andrew said, taking the beer Gary offered him. But that costs money, for lawyers, for filing fees. And I don't have any. Go to legal aid, Gary suggested. They help low-income people. You're officially low income now. Low income. Andrew smirked bitterly. 3 months ago, he had a company, an apartment, bank accounts. Now he was a low-income taxi driver in a rented room. Hey, Gary, Andrew started. How are things with your ex-wife? Do you guys talk? It varies, Gary shrugged. The first year, we didn't speak at all. Then our daughter got older, and I started taking her on weekends. Things gradually got better. Now we have a decent relationship. We even get together for our daughter's birthday. But that's because I knew I was the one who screwed up the marriage. I understood it, accepted it, apologized, and she forgave me. I don't know if she forgave me or not. Gary finished his beer, but at least she stopped hating me. That's enough, Andrew pondered. Maybe he should try talking to Valerie too. Not about money, not about the property. Just talk. Explain that he understood his mistakes, that he regretted what happened. The next day, he arrived at the IRS office at exactly 10 a.m. He waited in line for half an hour, then was called into an office. Inspector Evans sat at a desk. Have a seat, she said, nodding to a chair. Andrew sat. A thick folder of documents lay on the table. We have concluded our audit of Miller Construction and your personal accounts, Evans began, opening the folder. We have identified numerous violations: underreporting of taxable income, fictitious transactions with shell companies, undeclared accounts in foreign banks. The total amount of your tax liability, including penalties and interest, is $638,000. Andrew nodded. The figure was expected. You are given 3 months to voluntarily pay this debt. Evans continued. If the debt is not paid within the specified period, we will refer the case to the District Attorney's Office to initiate criminal proceedings under Title 26 of the U.S. Code. That's tax evasion on a large scale. The penalty is up to 5 years in prison. 5 years. Andrew felt a cold knot in his stomach. "I don't have that kind of money," he said. "Then declare bankruptcy," Evans replied harshly. "Through the bankruptcy process, some of your debts may be discharged, but that is your problem, not ours. We have done our job. We expect payment." She handed him an official notice. Andrew took the document with trembling hands. Leaving the building, he got into his car and just sat there, staring through the windshield. 3 months, 90 days, until a possible prison sentence. His phone rang. Michael Porter. "Andrew, I have news." The former partner's voice was triumphant. "The court ruled in my favor. You owe me $240,000 in damages for that contract you stole 3 years ago, plus legal fees. Total, $260,000. I expect payment within a month." "I don't have the money, Mike," Andrew said wearily. "You'll find it," Porter snapped. "Or the court-martials will find it for you." He hung up. Andrew dropped his head onto the steering wheel. It was over. He was cornered from all sides. The IRS wanted over $600,000, Porter over $200,000, the bank over $300,000. The total debt exceeded $1 million. He had no way out except bankruptcy, and even after bankruptcy, a possible criminal case loomed. 6 months had passed. October painted the city in shades of yellow and red. The trees in the parks were shedding their leaves. A light fog settled in the mornings, and the evenings grew cold and short. Valerie stood by the window of her apartment, watching the city sink into twilight. The apartment had changed in these months. She had redecorated. Light walls instead of dark wallpaper, new furniture in the living room, new curtains in the bedroom. She had purged the house of all traces of Andrew, his books, his photos, even the scent of his cologne that had clung to the curtains. Now it was her space, hers and Nicky's. The boy had grown in 6 months, become more serious. He was sitting at his desk in his room, doing his homework. Valerie could hear him muttering to himself as he solved a math problem. She smiled. Nicky was coping. He had gotten used to a new life without a father in the house, but with stability and peace. The first few months after the divorce had been tough. Nicky often asked about his dad, cried at night, was angry at Valerie. She took him to a child psychologist, a calm woman who helped the boy process the trauma of the divorce. "A child needs time," the psychologist had said after one session. "He's lost his familiar world. His father left. The family broke apart. It's a blow. But you're doing everything right, Mrs. Miller. You're creating new stability, new rules, a new sense of home. Nicky will adapt soon." And he did. By the end of the summer, the boy had stopped crying at night, started socializing more with his classmates, and joined a soccer team. At home, he was calmer, more confident. He sometimes asked about his father, but without the earlier pain. He was just curious about how he was living. Valerie was changing too. The first few weeks after the divorce, she felt empty. The victory over Andrew hadn't brought joy, only relief and a strange exhaustion. She had won the battle but had paid for it with 12 years of her life, a broken family, and a traumatized child. But gradually, she came to understand. She had done what she had to do. She had protected herself and her son, and now they had a future. Valerie got a job. She found a position as an administrator at a private dental clinic. The salary was modest, but it was steady. The hours were convenient, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., with weekends off. She had time to pick up Nicky from school, cook dinner, and spend time with him. At work, she was valued. The clinic's director, Dr. Peterson, often praised her for her organizational skills and attentiveness. "Valerie, you're doing an excellent job," he would say. "The patients are happy. The paperwork is in order. If this continues, we'll give you a raise in 6 months." She thanked him and smiled. The job gave her a sense of purpose, structured her day, and, importantly, it kept her from dwelling on the past. Though the past sometimes reminded her of itself. A month ago, in early September, Andrew had asked to meet. They met in the same park where they had seen each other in June. Back then, he had been dejected, gaunt, asking for forgiveness. He said he understood his mistakes, that he regretted what had happened. Valerie listened to him calmly, without gloating. She was no longer angry with him. The anger had burned out over these months, leaving only the ashes of indifference. "Val, I want you to know," he had said then, sitting on the bench beside her. "I was a complete idiot. I destroyed our family for a pipe dream of wealth. I believed Mariana, who only wanted me as a temporary toy. I betrayed you and Nikki, and now I'm paying for it." "Paying for it?" she asked quietly. "I declared bankruptcy," Andrew admitted. "All my debts were discharged, but that doesn't mean I'm free. I'm barred from running a business for 3 years. I'm a taxi driver. I live in a rented room. My former partners won't speak to me. Mariana married someone else. I lost everything, Val. Absolutely everything." Valerie looked at him and saw a broken man, someone paying the full price for his decisions. "I'm sorry, Andrew," she said sincerely, "but that was your choice." "I know," he nodded. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know. I get it. Too late, but I get it. You were the best thing in my life, and I lost it." They sat in silence for a little longer. Then Andrew stood up. "Can I see Nikki? Not today, but on weekends. I want to be in his life, at least a little." Valerie thought for a moment. "If he wants to, I won't object." "Thank you." Andrew held out his hand. She shook it, formally, like a business acquaintance. He walked away, hunched over, his hands in his pockets. Valerie watched him go and felt not triumph, but sadness. Sadness for what could have been but wasn't. For 12 years that had ended like this. After that meeting, Nikki agreed to see his father. Once every 2 weeks, Andrew would pick him up for a few hours. They went to the movies, to the park, ate ice cream. The boy would come back thoughtful. Valerie didn't pry, giving him time to process his feelings. One evening, Nikki asked, "Mom, is Dad always going to be like this now? Sad?" "I don't know, sweetie," Valerie answered honestly. "It depends on him, on whether he can cope with what happened." "I feel sorry for him," the boy confessed. "But I'm still mad at him. He abandoned us." "Yes, he did," Valerie nodded. "And that hurts. But you know what? It's okay to be angry. It's also okay to feel sorry for him. Feelings can be complicated. The important thing is that you know I will always be with you. Always." Nikki hugged her. "I know, Mom." Now, standing by the window on an October evening, Valerie remembered that conversation. She looked at the clock. 7. Time to make dinner. She went to the kitchen, took out chicken and vegetables from the fridge, and put on some music, light jazz. As she cooked, she thought about how her life had changed. 6 months ago, she was a frightened housewife whom her husband was about to throw out onto the street. Today, she was an independent woman with a job, a home, and plans for the future. The financial compensation from Andrew and her salary allowed them to live comfortably. She had enrolled in a business administration course online. Twice a week in the evenings, when Nikki was at his grandmother's, she studied. She wanted to grow, to learn new things. Maybe in a year, she could find a better job. She also started going to a fitness club 3 times a week, getting in shape, relieving stress. After workouts, she felt strong, energetic. At work, she had made new friends. Her colleagues sometimes invited her out to happy hour or for coffee. Valerie went when she had time. One of the dentists at the clinic, Dr. David Carter, had recently asked her out for coffee, just as friends. They talked about work, life, plans. He was divorced, raising a teenage daughter, and understood what it was like to rebuild a life after a family falls apart. "You know, Valerie," he had said then, stirring his coffee, "the first year after my divorce, I thought my life was over, that I'd never be happy again. Then I realized it's not the end. It's a new beginning, a chance to fix mistakes, to build something better." "And did you build it?" Valerie asked. "I'm trying," he smiled. "My relationship with my daughter is good. I like my job. I've made new friends. You know, I even think I could love again someday, if I meet the right person." She smiled back but said nothing. Love seemed like something distant, unreal. After everything with Andrew, she wasn't sure she could trust anyone again. But time heals. Maybe in a year or two, she would be ready. Or maybe not. And that was okay too. Dinner was ready. Valerie set the table and called Nicky. The boy ran in, sat down, and reached for his plate. "How was homework?" she asked. "All done," Nicky nodded, eating his chicken. "I have a math test tomorrow, but I'm ready." "Good job." She ruffled his hair. "You can play video games for half an hour after dinner." "Yes!" the boy cheered. They ate, talking about school, Nicky's friends, the upcoming weekend. A normal family dinner, without tension, without fear, without the silence that had pervaded the last years of her marriage to Andrew. After dinner, Valerie cleaned up, and Nicky ran off to play. She sat on the couch with a cup of tea and opened a book, a mystery she had bought last week. She read, enjoying the quiet. Her phone rang. "Laura Davis." "Val, hi." The lawyer's voice was cheerful. "How are you?" "I'm good, Laura, thanks. Is everything okay?" "Oh yeah, just wanted to chat. Listen, it's my birthday on Saturday. I'm having a small party at my place, about 20 people. Wanna come?" Valerie thought about it. Saturday. Nicky would be at his grandmother's. "I'll come," she decided. "Thanks for the invitation." "Great. I'll see you then. By the way, my brother will be there. He's recently divorced, an engineer. A really interesting guy. Maybe I'll introduce you?" "Laura." "You don't have to." Valerie laughed. "I'm not ready for that." Okay, no pressure," Laura conceded. "But if you change your mind, let me know." They chatted a bit more and said goodbye. Valerie put her phone down and returned to her book. On Saturday morning, she dropped Nicky off at her mom's and then ran errands. She went to the grocery store, bought a new blouse for herself, and a board game for Nicky. Then she stopped by a bookstore, browsed the new releases, and bought a couple of novels. In the evening, getting ready for Laura's party, she put on the new blouse and jeans, applied a little makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror. She realized she was happy. She had a roof over her head, a beloved son, a job, plans, and freedom. The party at Laura's was fun. Guests mingled, laughed, and danced to the music. Valerie met several interesting people. Laura's brother, Paul, turned out to be a handsome man with intelligent eyes and a kind smile. They struck up a conversation in the kitchen about work, the city, favorite books. Paul was well-read, had a good sense of humor, and was a gentleman. At one point, Valerie caught herself thinking that she genuinely enjoyed talking to him. "Maybe we could go to the theater sometime?" he suggested at the end of the evening. "I heard there's a great play on downtown." Valerie hesitated, but then thought, why not? It's not a date, just a cultural outing. "Okay," she agreed. "Let's do that." They exchanged numbers. Valerie went home in a good mood. Another 2 weeks passed. October was coming to an end. The leaves were almost all gone, and it had gotten colder. Valerie was walking home from work late one evening. She had stayed late, and as she exited the subway station and walked toward her building, she saw a familiar figure. A middle-aged man in a dark jacket stood by the curb next to a beat-up car with a taxi light on top. Andrew. He didn't see her. He was smoking, looking at his phone. Valerie stopped, watching him. He had aged in these 6 months. His face was drawn, his back stooped. Her heart ached with pity, with the understanding that before her was a man who had paid too high a price for his mistakes. Andrew looked up and saw her. For a moment, their eyes met. He froze, the cigarette smoldering between his fingers. Valerie slowly walked closer. "Hi, Andrew," she said calmly. "Hi, Val," he replied hoarsely. You look good." "Thanks. Are you working?" "Yeah, waiting for a fare." He stubbed out his cigarette. "How's Nicky?" "He's good, doing great in school. He's on the soccer team. They have a game soon. He wants you to come." "Really?" Andrew's face lit up. "He wants me to come?" "Yes. The game is next Saturday at 10 a.m. Will you be there?" Of course, I'll be there, he nodded. Definitely. Valerie started to leave, but then she asked, Andrew, how are you? Really, how are you? He sighed. Honestly, it's tough. But I'm managing. He gave a sad smile. What other choice is there? Give up? No, I have Nicky. I have to hold on for him. Valerie nodded. That's right. Hold on, Andrew. For your son. Val, he called out as she was about to leave. Did you ever forgive me? She thought for a moment. I don't know, she answered honestly. Maybe someday I will. Or maybe not. But I'm not angry anymore. And that's a lot. Thank you, he whispered. Valerie turned and walked toward her building. She didn't look back. She walked forward, into her new life. At home, Nicky was already asleep. She peeked into his room, adjusted his blanket, kissed him, then went to her own room and sat on the bed. The wind rustled outside, chasing the last leaves across the pavement. Valerie thought about the past, the present, the future, about how terrifying it had been that night when she decided on her desperate plan, about how difficult the first months after the divorce had been, and about how free she felt now. Freedom hadn't come all at once. It had come gradually, in small steps, with every redecorated room, every day at her new job, every evening spent with her son, every new acquaintance. Freedom wasn't the absence of problems. It was the ability to deal with them. It was the right to choose your own path. It was the knowledge that you could stand up for yourself. And Valerie had proven that to herself, to her son, to the whole world. She closed her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow was a new day, with new possibilities, a new life. And somewhere on the other side of the city, Andrew Miller sat in his car, looking at a photo of Nicky on his phone. The boy was laughing in the picture, happy, carefree. Andrew understood that he had lost his right to that happy family, but he hadn't lost his son. If he tried, if he changed, if he proved himself, maybe someday Nicky would start to trust him again. It was his only hope. And he clung to it. His phone pinged. A new ride request. Andrew snapped out of his thoughts, started the car, and drove off. Life went on, differently for everyone, but it went on.